A dense fog slowly spreads across the entire screen. For a moment, nothing can be seen, only a thick white veil covering everything. Then, from deep within that mist, something begins to emerge. At first, it looked like a strange silhouette, almost like something out of a dream, or perhaps out of someone's imagination. A colossal metallic structure slowly appears. This is Howl's moving castle. Before we go any further, a quick spoiler warning. If you haven't seen this film yet and would prefer to experience it completely fresh, I recommend saving this video for later. Watch the movie first and then come back so we can explore and analyze it together. But if you've already seen it, or if you're the kind of viewer who enjoys learning about a story before deciding whether to watch it, then you're in the right place. Because there is a lot to talk about when it comes to this extraordinary film. The story begins in a town that seems suspended somewhere between the late 19th century and the early 20th. Here we meet Sophie, a quiet young woman who spends her days working in a hat shop, carefully crafting elegant hats for customers she rarely interacts with. From a nearby window, she looks out toward the distant hills, and there, moving slowly along the horizon, she sees something remarkable: the strange silhouette of the wandering castle. Not long after, enormous flying warships cross the sky overhead, their designs clearly military in nature. Right from the beginning, the film makes something very clear. This world is at war. The scene returns to Sophie, quiet, thoughtful, standing by herself. And in that moment, the film reveals something subtle but very important. Sophie does not consider herself beautiful. That quiet insecurity will become one of the most important emotional threads of the entire story. Hello friends, welcome to this space created to rediscover, analyze and explore some of our favorite films, the characters we love the most from cinema and entertainment, and occasionally a few topics that capture the imagination of audiences everywhere. My name is Terius and this is Terius List, a place where we can spend some time together enjoying and reflecting on the stories that stay with us long after the credits roll. Now, returning to our story, Sophie leaves the hat shop and walks into a city that feels both familiar and strange at the same time. Its streets combine medieval architecture with early 20th century industrial design, all wrapped in a strong steampunk aesthetic. Steampunk imagines a world where technology evolved using steam engines and intricate mechanical systems instead of electricity. As Sophie walks through the crowded streets, she quickly becomes lost among the people and the noise of the city. Two soldiers begin to follow her, making uncomfortable comments and blocking her path. Just as the situation begins to feel threatening, a young man with long blonde hair suddenly appears beside her. He acts as if he already knows her. With a simple gesture of magic, he forces the soldiers to march away against their will. Shadowy creatures start emerging from the walls themselves, revealing that this world is not only shaped by machines and war, but also by powerful magic. Then he jumps, but instead of falling, he begins to walk through the air. Together, they cross the city skyline, floating above the rooftops. The young man eventually leaves Sophie on the balcony of what turns out to be a busy commercial building. Before Sophie can ask him anything more, he disappears. For a moment, she wonders if the entire encounter might have been a dream, but when she finds Letty inside the building and tells her what happened, her sister confirms that it was very real. Letty immediately recognizes what Sophie is describing. That must have been a wizard, she says. And then she mentions a name that the entire town seems to know: Howl, the wizard who is said to steal hearts. Later that evening, Sophie returns home alone to the hat shop. A mysterious woman walks in. Her presence is immediately unsettling. She looks around the shop with visible disdain, mocking the hats, the decorations, and the entire place. The stranger smiles, and with a single movement of her hand, she casts a powerful spell on Sophie, a spell that comes with one cruel condition. Sophie has been transformed into an old woman. But this transformation is not only physical, in many ways it is emotional as well. At the beginning of the story, Sophie is already living as if she were invisible. She doesn't believe she is special. She doesn't allow herself to dream. She doesn't see herself as the protagonist of her own life. The spell does not create that feeling, it simply makes it visible. The next morning, Sophie's mother arrives at the hat shop. It is revealed that she is actually the true owner of the business. When she asks about Sophie, the workers explain that she has not yet come downstairs from her room. Concerned, her mother goes upstairs to check on her. Inside the room, Sophie sits quietly on the edge of her bed, still trying to process what has happened. Part of her hopes that the entire experience was only a terrible dream. When her mother knocks on the door, Sophie asks her to go away. She says she feels very sick and cannot come out. Her mother pauses for a moment after hearing her voice. "You must be very ill," she says with mild concern. "You sound like you're 90 years old." Then she leaves, and in that moment, Sophie understands something devastating. This is not a dream. The curse is real. Sad, confused, and already beginning to accept her fate, Sophie gathers a few belongings and a small piece of bread. She knows she cannot allow anyone to see her like this. Without saying goodbye to anyone, she quietly leaves the house and begins walking toward the mountains. If she cannot explain the curse, then the only option left is to disappear. As she slowly climbs the mountain path, Sophie notices something lying among the bushes. At first, she thinks it is a fallen branch that could serve as a walking stick. But when she tries to pull it free, she realizes it is something else entirely. It is a strange scarecrow with a head shaped like a turnip. Sophie mutters that she has always hated turnips since she was a child. The scarecrow remains perfectly still, standing upright in a slightly unsettling way. Sophie shrugs, says goodbye, and continues on her way. But after a few moments, she hears something behind her. The scarecrow is following her. But the strange creature suddenly hops forward and offers her a walking stick. Sophie hesitates, then accepts it. It seems the scarecrow is only trying to help. Half joking, half irritated, she tells it that since it already found her a walking stick, perhaps it could also help her find a place to sleep. High above her, a massive warship passes through the sky. Not long after, she notices small ashes drifting through the air. And suddenly, through the mist of the mountains, she finds herself standing in front of something extraordinary. The enormous wandering structure she saw earlier from the town. Howl's moving castle. Standing beside it once again is the strange scarecrow with the turnip head. Sophie sighs and shakes her head. Sophie decides to step inside the castle. The interior looks just as strange as the exterior. Pipes, gears, and pieces of machinery seem to be assembled in chaotic layers. In the center of the room, a fire burns inside a small hearth. But this is no ordinary fire. The flames suddenly take shape and begin to speak. This is Calcifer, a fire demon bound to the castle. At first, both Sophie and Calcifer are surprised to see each other. Sophie eventually falls asleep in front of the fire. Later, she is awakened by the sound of someone knocking at the castle door. From the top of a staircase appears a small boy. His name is Markle, and he is Howl's apprentice. When he sees Sophie, he freezes in surprise. Embarrassed for having entered the castle without permission, Sophie pretends to still be asleep. Markle walks down the stairs and studies her carefully. Then, without waking her, he quickly disguises himself as an old wizard before opening the door. Outside stands an official messenger from the kingdom. He carries a formal invitation addressed to the great wizard Jenkins, ordering him to appear before the king and assist in the war effort. When he returns inside, Sophie is no longer pretending to sleep. Markle immediately demands to know who she is and why she is in the castle. Sophie quickly invents an answer. She claims that Calcifer allowed her to come inside. This leads to a brief and slightly chaotic argument between Sophie and the fire demon. But before they can continue, someone knocks on the door again. This time, Calcifer tells Markle to turn a small color dial located beside the entrance. When Markle opens the door again, something extraordinary happens. The world outside has completely changed. Instead of the same landscape, the door now opens into an entirely different city. Another messenger arrives with a similar invitation. This one is addressed to a different wizard named Pendragon. Sophie watches the scene in amazement. It becomes clear that the castle door is not an ordinary door at all. Depending on the position of the dial, it connects to completely different places. And suddenly, we understand one of the most fascinating ideas in the entire film. Howl's castle does not simply wander across the land. It exists between places, between kingdoms, between identities. Not long after this strange sequence of visitors, Howl finally returns to the castle. He arrives exhausted. His clothes are torn, and it is clear he has just come from attacking warships in the sky. But something about his actions is unusual. Howl does not fight for one kingdom or another. Instead, he attacks the warships of both sides. Inside the castle, Sophie begins preparing breakfast. She uses Calcifer as the fire for cooking. The fire demon complains loudly, insisting that he is not simply a stove. But Sophie cleverly reminds him of their secret agreement. If he refuses to help her, she will tell Howl about the pact they made. Calcifer quickly realizes he has no choice. He reluctantly agrees. A moment later, Howl enters the room. Markle informs him that several official invitations have arrived from different kingdoms. Each one calls for the service of a powerful wizard. Some letters are addressed to Jenkins, others to Pendragon. Then, Howl notices Sophie. He asks calmly who she is. Without hesitation, Sophie answers that she is simply the new cleaning lady. Howl accepts this explanation with surprising indifference. In fact, he seems almost amused by it. Soon after, he invites both Sophie and Markle to sit and share breakfast. Markle is clearly excited. He says he cannot remember the last time they had such a proper meal inside the castle. He's slowly beginning to feel like a home. During breakfast, Howl suddenly looks at Sophie with curiosity. He asks her what she is hiding in her pocket. Confused, Sophie checks and discovers a note she didn't know she was carrying. It was placed there by the Witch of the Waste. Sophie hands the note to Howl. The moment he reads it, his expression changes. He immediately recognizes the message as part of very ancient and dangerous magic. You will swallow a falling star, heartless man, and your heart will belong to me. This message is extremely important. It contains the key to understanding the mystery surrounding Howl, so it is worth remembering, because this spell will play a crucial role in the final resolution of the story. After the strange message is revealed, Sophie decides to do something. She begins cleaning everything, and there is a lot to clean. At one point, while cleaning near the fireplace, Sophie almost extinguishes Calcifer. The fire demon immediately panics. He shouts at her to be careful. As Sophie continues cleaning and exploring the castle, she begins to notice something else. The castle is moving. Slowly but steadily, it walks across the mountains on its strange mechanical legs. From one of the upper windows, Sophie sees an incredible view of the landscape below. The world stretches far into the distance, reinforcing the feeling that the castle is not just a place to live, it is part of an endless journey. Little by little, something begins to change. The castle is no longer just a mysterious magical machine, it begins to feel like a home. Meanwhile, far away in the sky, Howl continues his dangerous missions. Transformed into a large winged creature, he flies directly into the heart of the battlefield. He witnesses the destruction caused by the war and attacks the warships relentlessly. It does not matter which side they belong to. To Howl, the war itself is the enemy. Eventually, he returns to the castle once again, exhausted from the conflict. Speaking to Calcifer, he complains bitterly about the situation. He says the war is nothing but complete stupidity. He quietly walks towards Sophie, who is sleeping. When Sophie sleeps, she no longer appears as an old woman. Instead, she looks exactly as she did before the curse, young, peaceful, and changed. The following day, Sophie and Markle travel to the nearby town to buy food and supplies for the castle. Something about Sophie has clearly changed. She seems happier, more confident, more alive, and something else becomes noticeable as well. She does not look quite as old as before. This leads to one of the most fascinating ideas in the entire film. Whenever Sophie acts with determination, when she helps others, when she takes action, when she allows herself to feel something deeply, she begins to appear younger. Sometimes only a little, sometimes almost completely. But whenever she doubts herself, whenever she feels small or insecure again, the old woman returns. Sophie's age is not controlled by time. It is controlled by her inner state. Later, Sophie enters Hal's room to bring him some warm milk and check on him after his latest battle. Inside, she discovers one of the most extraordinary spaces in the entire castle. The room is filled with magical objects, strange devices, bright colors, and impossible details. He tells her something important. He has been summoned to appear before the king. Sophie asks him a simple question. Why not just refuse? Hal then reveals a document he once signed, a magical contract that forces him to respond whenever the royal court calls for him. He cannot simply ignore the invitation, but he has an idea. Instead of going himself, he will send Sophie in his place. He asks her to pretend to be his mother. Her mission will be simple. She must go to the palace and tell the great royal sorceress, Madame Suliman, that her son is far too cowardly to appear in person. Hal hopes that this humiliating message might convince them to leave him alone. Surprisingly, Sophie agrees. Before she leaves, Howl gives her a ring. He tells her that the ring will guide her back to the castle no matter where she goes. He also promises that he will be watching over her throughout the journey, though he will travel in disguise. On the road to the palace, a small dog begins following Sophie. Naturally, she assumes the dog must be Howl in disguise, but things soon become even more complicated. Along the road, Sophie encounters the carriage of the Witch of the Waste. The witch immediately recognizes her. She reminds Sophie that she is the same girl she cursed not long ago, and she reveals something unexpected. She too has been summoned to the palace. Both of them are heading to the same place. Inside, the witch eventually collapses into a chair, unaware that it is actually part of a trap. Strange magical devices surround her and begin draining her powers. This was Suleiman's plan all along. She intends to strip the Witch of the Waste of her magic completely. Soon after, Sophie is brought before Madame Suleiman. Suleiman greets her politely and invites her to sit. Nearby, Sophie notices the small dog that followed her earlier. To her surprise, the dog is sitting beside Suleiman. She asks if it belongs to her. Suleiman calmly confirms that it does. In fact, the dog had been sent to escort Sophie to the palace. In that moment, Sophie realizes something unsettling. Almost everything that happened on her journey was carefully planned. Suleiman begins explaining the situation. Howl, she says, was once one of her most brilliant students, but one day he allowed a demon to steal his heart. Since then, she believes he has become dangerous. She warns Sophie that if Howl refuses to present himself before the king and submit to royal authority, she will take away his magical powers just as she has done to the Witch of the Waste. At that moment, the witch is brought into the room, but she is no longer the terrifying sorceress she once was. Now, she appears as a frail, powerless old woman. Seeing this, Sophie becomes furious. She finally speaks up. She tells Madame Suleiman that now she understands why Howl refused to come. He is not the monster she describes. He is a good wizard and a good man. He does not need to surrender himself to anyone. As Sophie speaks passionately, something remarkable happens. Her appearance begins to change. Right in front of Madame Suleiman, Sophie transforms back into her young self. Suleiman immediately understands what this means. "You are in love with him," she says calmly. Sophie is startled by the statement, and in that moment of doubt, she turns back into an old woman once again.
At that moment, through the garden, a flying machine arrives announcing the presence of the king, who enters the palace to greet Madame Suleiman. Hey! If you're enjoying what you're watching, please subscribe, leave your valuable like, and share this video with your friends and loved ones. It really helps me continue creating more content we can enjoy together. And now, let's get back to our movie from the Terius list. The king declares that he no longer intends to keep using magic to wage war, and says that Madame Suleiman magic alone is more than enough. But then, through the palace doors, another king appears, the real king. The king standing there was actually Howl, masked as the monarch himself. The real king burst into laughter at the sight of his supposed double, assuming it is simply another one of Madame Suleiman's magical creation for protection. Amused, he walks away without giving it any importance. Howl then steps forward before Madame Suleiman and declares that he has fulfilled his promise to come to the palace, and now he says he's taking Sophie with him. Madame Suleiman answers that it won't be that easy. In that instant, Howl escapes with Sophie while being chased by Suleiman's servants. They flee abroad, the same flying craft Howl used to arrive, racing through the palace gardens. During the escape, Howl leaves Sophie in charge of the flying machine despite her protests, assuring her not to worry. The ring he gave her, he says, will guide her safely back to the castle. Meanwhile, both the Witch of Waste and Madame Suleiman's tiny dog cling to Sophie's dress, forcing her to take them alone whether she wants to or not. At the same time, Howl stays behind to confront Suleiman's soldiers, distracting them long enough for Sophie to escape. Sophie crash lands near the castle, damaging part of its structure, but everyone survives. Immediately, the castle begins to move away from the city, trying to get as far from the war as possible. That night, Howl finally returns from battling the enemy forces, but something is different. He arrives is transformed into a monstrous winged beast, and unlike before, he can no longer return to his human form. In that state, he hides inside his room. Sophie, now completely rejuvenated, awakens and notices blood stains and feathers scattered across the floor. Worried, she follows the train into Howl's room, which has transformed into something resembling a dark animal den, a monstrous lair. Sophie approaches him. She calls him his name. She tries to reach him, but Howl's pushed her away, and in that moment, she confesses that she loves him. There is something deeply tragic here. Every time Howl enters battle, he loses some piece of his humanity. He becomes more and more like the dark creature, and less like the man he truly is. It is the price of fighting through the same language of violence, even when the cause itself is just. Sophie later awakens in her bed, once again transformed into an old woman, believing everything had only been a dream. But Howl awakens completely restored, overflowing with energy. Using both his magic and Calcifer's power, he repairs the castle after Sophie's crash landing. Not only does he rebuild it, he expands it, adding new rooms and comforts. After all, he says, with the arrival of the Witch of the Waste and the dog, the family has grown. Sophie looks out the window and discovers something incredible. The castle, or at least this section of it, is now located on the very same street where her old home and hat shop once stood. Howl has transformed the castle's interior into a recreation of Sophie's home. Excited, he shows her a new dial connected to the magical door, one that now leads to entirely new places. When Sophie opens it, she discovers a vast valley covered in flowers. Howl takes her deeper into the valley to a small cabin beside a river. Beautiful, simple, peaceful. He explains that this was his secret refuge when he was a child. Sophie groans uneasily. Everything about this moment feels like a goodbye. She asks Howl what is happening, because it feels as though he is preparing to leave or disappear forever. Howl simply answers that the only thing that he wants is that they live comfortable without liking anything. But Sophie tells him that none of that matters to her. What she truly wants is to help him. She tells him that she wants to help him, even if she is no longer young or beautiful. Howl answers that she is beautiful. Sophie loses all her youth and transforms once again into an old woman. And there lies the true heart of the mystery. Sophie does not feel ugly because others compare her to someone else. She feels ugly because she compares herself to others. Even before the curse, she already felt old inside. Surrounded by beauty and attention directed toward everyone else, Sophie learned how to disappear. Suddenly, a massive warship appears in the distance. Howl becomes furious as he watches his private valley being invaded, and with a single magical gesture, he causes the ship to malfunction and crash. From the crashed machine emerge sorcerers, Madame Suleiman's servants, who immediately attack him. Howl quickly takes Sophie to the portal door that will safely return her to the castle, while he stays behind to fight. Sophie asks whether the ship was an enemy vessel or an allied one. Howl replies that it does not matter. Meanwhile, Madame Suleiman uses deception to discover the location of Sophie's home and decides to attack it by sending her demonic creatures. At the same time, Sophie's town is bombarded by warships. Howl appears to defend the house and tells Sophie to remain inside while he stands guard outside. Even though she wants to stop him, Howl insists on protecting her. Sophie travels through the magical door to the castle in the mountains, and from there witnesses the destruction of the town. Seeing that Howl is still risking himself to defend the house, she realizes she must help him. She evacuates everyone from the castle, including Calcifer, causing the entire structure to collapse. Calcifer tells her he needs something from her in order to perform that magic. He asks for her eyes. Sophie refuses, but instead offers him her braid. Calcifer consumes it, grows stronger, and creates a brand new moving castle. Sophie celebrates what they have accomplished, and Calcifer jokingly replies, "Imagine what I could have done with your eyes, or with your heart." At that moment, the Witch of the Waste discovers the truth. Calcifer possesses Howl's heart. She desperately tries to take it from the fire, and as she does, the castle begins to fall apart. The castle splits in two. One half crashes into the ravine carrying Sophie and the dog. The other remains behind with the Witch of the Waste and Mark. Sophie survives the fall and realizes that the right Howl gave her in seem now guiding her somewhere. Following its light, she discovers a mysterious portal door leading her into the past, to Howl's childhood, inside a small cabin that once served as his secret refuge. There she witnessed a rain of falling stars, celestial beings that destroy themselves as they descend onto the earth. One of them falls directly into the hands of young Howl. That star begs him to eat it, and Howl accepts. And here, the true essence of the conflict is finally revealed. Calcifer is Howl's heir. Separated, neither of them can even truly exist well. At last, Sophie understands how to save them both. The ring begins to disintegrate, and Sophie is pulled back toward her own time. Before vanishing, she cries out to Howl that he now knows how to help him, and begs him to find her in the future. And now we finally understand why Howl appeared in Sophie's life from the very beginning. Sophie finds Howl nearly lost forever inside his beast form. She kisses him and asks him to take her to Calcifer. The Witch of the Waste finally returns Howl's heart, and Sophie places it back inside his chest. Howl awakens. Calcifer escapes into the sky like a star, but then returns of his own free will. Meanwhile, Turnip Head sacrifices himself to save everyone. When Sophie kisses him, he transforms into the missing prince of the neighboring kingdom, the very disappearance that originally triggered the war. Madame Suleiman's dog informs her of everything, and once she understands the truth, she orders the war to end. Calcifer finally returns for good, and with his magic, the castle transforms into a new flying form. And so, the story closes with the castle floating among the clouds, and a kiss between Howl and Sophie. So, what do you think of this beautiful film? Let us now take a moment to remember the people who created this masterpiece. Studio Ghibli's Howl's Moving Castle is one of the greatest animated films ever made. Founded in 1985, among their most celebrated works are Spirited Away, winner of the Academy Award, My Neighborhood Totoro, Princess Mononoke, and of course, Howl's Moving Castle. Released in 2004, the film was written and directed by Hayao Miyazaki and inspired by the novel Howl's Moving Castle by Diane Wynne Jones. However, Miyazaki did far more than simply adapt the original story. He transformed it into a deeply personal reflection on war, love, aging, and fear, and the loss of humanity. And now, it's finally time to our evaluation. We will divide the review into 5 categories: visual design, characters, animation quality, story, and soundtrack. Each category can receive a maximum of 2 points. Visual design, simply extraordinary. The colors, environment, landscape, architecture, and overall artistic design create a world that feels alive and unforgettable. It fully deserves 2 points. Characters. The cast is filled with deep and beautifully written characters. Sophie breaks away from traditional heroine archetype. Howl is charismatic, contradictory, emotional, and complex. And the moving castle itself becomes one of the story's central characters. Another 2 points. Animation quality. Here, animation is absolutely stunning. Every line, movement, texture, and detail feels crafted with care. Nothing feels empty. Nothing feels exaggerated. Everything contributes to the living world created for this story. Another 2 points. Story. Intelligent, layered, emotional, and surprisingly mature. 2 more points. Soundtrack. An absolute masterpiece. Joe Hisaishi does not simply accompany the film with music. He tells a story from within it. Merry-Go-Round of Life contains the soul of the entire movie inside the melody. And the ending theme, The Promise of the War, is deeply emotional even without understanding the language. The soundtrack also deserves 2 points. Final result, 10 out of 10 points. For me, Howl's Moving Castle is truly a masterpiece. This has been Terius List. Thank you so much for joining me. Please subscribe, leave your like, share the video, and let me know your thoughts in the comments. I will see you in the next masterpiece from the list. But before we go, in our next episode, a film that has become an absolute cult classic. If you are a fan of science fiction and space horror, this one is mandatory viewing. Next on Terius List, Alien, the Eighth Passenger. More than 40 years after its release, many younger generations barely know it today. Do not miss our next encounter. I'll be waiting for you right here. Hey, did you already leave your like and subscribe? Thank you so much.